Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you might be. This is the Show Me the Money session, okay? And what we're going to be talking about is how you're going to grow your venture by raising capital. But as you're going to see, we're going to be talking about a lot more than that. This is the A-list of guidance on this topic that you're going to get with experience all over the world. I don't want to, date you guys or age you guys, but I think there's about 50 years of investment experience, maybe more. I think actually more on this panel, and super excited to get right into it. Nabila, I think we're just going to roll, and start with some questions. I know folks are still joining in the audience, but we got limited time, and I think we're going to get right into it. I'm going to start with you, Dimple. You began your career at Goldman Sachs. A lot of people, once they start at Goldman Sachs, that's it. They just stay. That's the top. So why would you leave? But you did leave, and you went to you left Goldman Sachs. Crazy enough thing to do, to start an educational social enterprise. Exited that to go to Accenture. Now you lead impact investing for one of the largest, most storied family offices in Europe. So along the way, you might tell the folks what a family office is, because not everybody knows that. And then, tell us something like turning points in your journey, and how raising capital made a difference at different times, both for the funds you were deploying and also for your own ventures.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. I'm so happy to be here. Hello, everyone, wherever you are. Hello from Amsterdam, which is where I'm based here in Europe. I think in a castle at a team offsite. Shh, don't tell anyone. I think there were a few things that really contributed to my path, because as you said, it's not linear, and all of our personal journeys play this part. So I immigrated from India as a young child when I was 6. And when I was in college, I realized that every summer when we kept going back and forth to India, how my life was diverging from that of my not only female relatives, but also the girl child in general from a country like India, because my parents had made one decision to move to a more progressive country in a first world country. And that's when I realized things like education can really be a level playing field. So, I worked at Goldman Sachs when Goldman was private. It was a very different era of the firm and of Wall Street. And in 99, when the firm went public, it was the first dot-com boom. And I thought, why not? I can always go back to Wall Street. And for me, because education had been such an empowering thing, I wanted to start a company focused on education, and technology was an obvious enabler. So I had firsthand experience of being a female founder, a diverse founder, and raising money from VCs. And so after that whole experience, although we scaled the company and rode the roller coaster down, I realized, I'd like to be on the other side of the negotiating table, actually deploying the capital instead of asking for it all the time. And so when I went to Wharton Business School, I was clear that I wanted to be an investor. But I really wanted to be a social investor because of my background coming from a developing country, because I had been an ed tech entrepreneur. And for a little bit in India before business school, I was in clean tech. So for me, being an impact investor was really the culmination of everything I was and everything I had done. And then in the last 6 years, I decided, this is so personal for me. How do I do it for a big family office? And for those of you who don't know, a family office is a name given to a very, very wealthy family that's big enough to manage their own assets by themselves. So they don't have to go to a Goldman Sachs or a Merrill Lynch. The family office I work for is 100 years old. We support 1,000 members from the same family, and we manage all of their assets globally around the world. But the portion I manage is in impact investing. So now I know that the work I do that was personal for me is also personal for this family. And so it's been a great journey. And now I can have seen both sides of the coin, from being an entrepreneur to being an impact investor.
Fantastic. 1,000 people in the same family. That's where you're managing their assets. It's a lot of people, a lot of responsibility too. And in terms of where you deploy it and the impact it has. So Bobby, I knew of you, knew of a couple of your companies that I've been tracking, but the way I got connected to you most recently is the legendary Cassie Kebede, who is one of the top investors in East Africa and leads a private equity firm. I was talking with him about early stage funding on the African continent, and we were having this back and forth. And he said, the person you need to talk to is Bobby Pittman, because I do later stage, I do growth stage. You got to talk to Bobby Pittman. So I said, okay, if he's good enough for Classy, he's good enough for me. So let's take a look at it. In a prior administration, you were the lead advisor to the President of the United States in African affairs. You managed $25 billion, that's with me, folks, in infrastructure finance for the African Development Bank. And now you're building new ventures in West Africa. So what happened there? What about the billions? What about, don't you want to go even bigger?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Phil. And, for me, what I've decided, even though I worked in some big bureaucracies, I was always excited to be a part of new endeavors and really getting things started, as people call it, kind of the 0 to 1 aspect, which is really hard, but I find it extremely rewarding. And so, even when I worked in the U.S. government, I was part of, standing up PEPFAR, which was President Bush's HIV/AIDS initiative, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and some other kind of new initiatives. And again, it was very hard, but it was very rewarding, and similar at the African Development Bank when I ran operations there. So, myself and I have two partners, and we really are excited about, again, that early journey. And I would say, it's interesting to follow Dimple. For me, you hear for her and her decision making, it's very personal. And I think one of the things that I see, and that very much is kind of my North Star, is to find that personal connection in fundraising. And I've raised money from friends and family, as small as $5,000, and I've raised money from celebrities, and I've raised, tens of millions from large institutions. And in all those cases, for me, it's always about finding that personal connection with the person on the other side of the table. I think one of the things that a lot of entrepreneurs that I see and that come to me, I'm also an investor. My wife and I do also angel investing. And, one of the mistakes I see is, they read a blog post from somebody in Silicon Valley, normally tells them like the 10 things you need to have in your PowerPoint. They do that. They feel really good about it. And then it's almost like a right that someone's going to invest in them. And I think what they don't realize is, I'm sure Dimple's meeting, 3 people per day that read that same blog. They have a really great PowerPoint. They have great ideas. But the question is, are you kind of doing the extra research on the person on the other side? Are you finding a way to connect? And for me, that's really what I focus on. And Phil, you even mentioned it, we know Cassie, but even in our first conversation, I looked you up on LinkedIn, I looked you up on Facebook, I looked you up on anything else I can find. And I really try to look for those personal connections, not in a fake way, and in actually a very sincere way. Because I do think fundraising is an emotional process. And yes, you have to have all those arguments, but it is emotional. And the one thing I would just say on top of that, is it's not just about fundraising, right? I mean, the reason I think that's actually a great filter is because if you're going to build a company, if you're going to build, especially in the impact space, you're going to have to recruit a team, and to recruit the best team. Those people all have options, and they have to have a reason to come work with you. And so that's also emotional. You're going to have to secure customers, and the best customers in the world have lots of options. That's emotional. So for me, it is a good litmus test, and it is the litmus test. And it's a place that I find a lot of folks just fall deaf on, which I think for a lot of people, the opportunity then, because you can differentiate yourself by doing that extra work, doing that extra homework, and making that connection. And for me, that's really the central part for my experience in fundraising.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to go to Gabrielle next, because I know what you just said, Bobby, is going to really resonate with her. But, Gabrielle, you also, like Dimple, went to one of the world's top business schools, got an MBA there from INSEAD. I'll let you and Dimple duke it out as to whether it's INSEAD or Wharton is #1 in the world, but we know it's not Stanford or Harvard, so you can forget about that. And then you were leading growth, innovation, and digital strategy for one of the world's top fashion brands. And now, for the last few years, among other things, you've been building a school of public health, a college of public health in Ghana. So, similar to, you guys are going to begin to see a theme here. Our founder at the Holt Prize, has a book that is going to be coming out soon called The Pursuit of Impact. And you guys are all people who, went from, maybe you might say kind of conventional backgrounds, and then have been pursuing impact. And so, Gabrielle, you have one of those stories. How did that happen? How did you end up in West Africa building a college of public health with the background that you have?
Well, my parents ask me that all the time because I was actually raised in kind of a mountain community in the Western United States, a very small community, but was always part of family businesses. And my father's a lawyer, but he was always trying to build things that added value in our little community. And some of those things are not so small anymore, but I was constantly working with him on his projects, whether it was a construction or maybe it was even an improvement project with the farm or his law office or some of his business ventures. But it really opened my eyes to the possibility of creating value wherever you are. And one of the things that I found, whether I'm working at Gap Corporate or a family office or a or asset management firm, is I always find myself doing the things I wish were done. I'm trying to solve problems or fill in the gap. And I currently reside in Boston, Massachusetts. I wish I was trapped in a castle. Sometimes they write fairy tales about that. That's a really great place to be. I've been pretty much in my home for the last several months, but I work for a family office in Boston, and family offices, as Dimple described, are a category of asset management vehicles, but they take on so many different shapes. They're so diverse. And in our case, our family office is actually a smaller family office. It's not nearly been around as long as Anthos has. We come out of a private equity background, and many of the family members are the principals in the firm. And we do hire professionals, but my husband comes out of a decade and a half of private equity experience. I have my own experience. We hire experts where we need them, but we like to have our hands on the steering wheel. And so when you talk to our family office, there's some things that we're very, very interested and passionate about. And so for ours, like family office, one of the things that I think is valuable and differentiates us is our ability to be flexible and creative and add value to ventures. And our family office, we do a wide variety of things, but in the impact space, we're largely in West Africa, and there's a variety of reasons for that. When I joined the family office, they asked me to lead out their philanthropic portfolio, and it was broad and dispersed across the African continent. And I've been, alongside a lot of my business ventures, I've done philanthropy work. The truth is philanthropy is very well and good intentioned in acute places, but it is not sustainable. And so really one of the things that I've, again, looking to solve problems and add values to organizations is how do we instill and install business models that give us the sustainability and the impacts that the philanthropic initiative was aiming for. And so, as Phil cited, I am COO of a college in West Africa focused in public health right now. We're broadening it out to entrepreneurship programs in the very near future. But at this campus, we're looking how to build the ecosystem of healthcare delivery. How do we do it in more rural settings with the tools and resources that currently exist, but bringing in strategic resources? So we take more of an ecosystem approach and a sustainability approach. But it really goes back to one of our driving, ideas with investment and development and, you know, the aims of impact is we believe the entrepreneurs drive impact. That they really, as they add value and create new markets in communities and environments, that they're actually having the greatest sustainable impact. And so we're constantly, whether it's in the impact portfolio or whether it's in the for-profit, we're always looking for impact that creates value. And that leads us down a lot of diverse roads, as Bill indicated.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I gotta let you guys know I'm taking notes as we go, and so I'm going to be kind of looking up and down, and sort of sorting out where we're going to be going in the next few minutes. But Jamal, thank you so much for that, Gabrielle. And I think that we've got a few narratives now of people's lives, who started out in conventional careers, shifted to impact in the different ways, as we're going to see, that raising capital made a difference along that journey. Jamal, last but definitely not least, in terms of our kind of opening questions, we talked some about private equity, so I'm going to ask you to describe what private equity is. You've come out of a private equity background, in addition to running business development for a major global fintech firm. And so you've seen it, from different sides, both in terms of the business model aspect of really creating sustainability in a venture, but also now, amazingly, you are raising a $100 million fund to support refugee businesses. And we had a challenge at the Hult Prize a few years ago that prompted Ahmed Ashkar, our founder, to create his own refugee-focused business, formulaic, here in DC. But you're doing this at the $100 million level. So tell us, something about your journey, what the private equity world is. We've heard something about family offices. Bobby leads kind of an early stage fund. And give us a little bit of a sense of what that's been like for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Phil, and glad to be among such distinguished people. I'm here, like I said, to learn and share. My journey has been a little different. I mean, my passion was at the beginning not as structured. In essence, I've traveled around the world looking for education, and at the same time, coming from a family of entrepreneurs and financiers at the same time. I'm both American and Moroccan at the same time. I started off my career coming out of college in private equity out of Singapore, a boutique fund investing in fintech companies in Asia Pacific all along the Mekong. And this was early 2005. My first internship was with the company that I'm working for right now, was CEEF, where I was introduced to private equity. And it was private equity with an angle. The idea was for us to be able to raise capital and deploy in what we call the Sherpas, or frontier economies, which are the entrepreneurs. No one knows their country better than the locals do, and nobody knows where value is added or created better than entrepreneurs in these markets do. So the idea was to raise smaller funds, more high-risk capital, and to deploy in growth companies in these markets. I went off to Singapore, more on the conventional private equity side, mid-cap companies, and the idea was companies that are providing sort of technological transformation. Before now, digitization is a term. We were looking for digitization in various companies in these markets. Of course, as everybody knows, in around 2009, the financial crisis hit, and it was not only a sort of a crisis of the world, it was also a personal crisis. Simply, when you come in from the conventional private equity world, money is the name of the game. And at the same time, your lifestyle depicts that. The nature of the people you meet with and travel with to raise funds, to deploy capital, was about that. And so in essence, the financial crisis just sort of wiped billions off the map and a lot of livelihoods with it. Luckily for us, or our type, who have an education, you could easily fly out to different markets and look for a second job. But at the same time, it was quite difficult at that time. I flew back to Morocco, where I started with a fintech company that was a local Moroccan company. It was a Moroccan startup that grew gradually and was able to lock in a few contracts in West Africa and in East Africa, and slowly going to the Middle East. And now it's basically providing card payment solutions to about top tier banks all over the world. Started off by a Moroccan company. And in essence, that was a light bulb for me. I led their business development in Asia Pacific and in Latin America and the Caribbean. And going through that journey, we were introduced to a lot of businesses where in the world of financial inclusion, where the model was, of course, top line and bottom line, but at the same time, the revenue generation was built out of building business models with people at the base of the pyramid. And so that introduced me to that world. And what they needed was patient, smart capital for them to be able to grow, and also capital that was, in essence, would draw more capital in the terms of technical assistance, and the whole world of blended finance appeared to me. So I joined SEEF in 2015, started off in Qatar, and with SEEF, we've started a few funds in Morocco, focused on the startup industry, in the Caribbean, looking for SMEs that would sort of create diversity in the economies. And throughout this journey, as you know, the Syrian crisis happened, which I tend to call the European crisis, because forced displacement has been, since the beginning of time, has been affecting a lot of countries before the Syrian crisis. And wherever we worked, whether it was in Colombia or in Central America, in Bangladesh, I noticed that there was always a theme where the company we were working in were considering whether to hire somebody who was outside and figure out paperwork, where they had some added value, or provide product services to this new market that just started next door. And we thought, I mean, there's clearly an opportunity here. And then we decided to launch the Forcibly Displaced Peoples Fund, which is targeting companies that disproportionately benefit the forcibly displaced people in developing countries around the world.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, yeah, I mean, you know, and the notion that you can deploy, $100 million of capital into refugee-focused ventures, I think underscores the magnitude of the opportunity that there's in this space. So we've got one tip so far, practical tip for the group, which is do not read blog posts by people in Silicon Valley. But that may seem like a little bit of a flippant comment, for me to make out of the different insights that you've had. But Bobby, I want to get back to you, because you're really working with entrepreneurs in environments that are not Silicon Valley at all. And could you kind of, let us know what the world is of raising capital for the entrepreneurs that are on this call, and why that's different from what they might see if they look at like the movie The Social Network, or, what they read about venture capitalists, in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. What's the reality of raising capital for the companies that you work with?
Yeah, no, it's important, and I would say, right, I wouldn't say don't read the blog post. It's more of an and read that and I think one of the things, I mean, my analogy would be, when I worked in government, there was always someone on the team that would say that had worked at ExxonMobil. And they would tell the rest of us that we didn't understand the private sector, and here's how the private sector works, as if it's like one,
the private sector,
one unit that thinks a certain way. And I think fundraising, and of course, when I got into the private sector, I learned that person was pretty wrong and was just using that to bully and try to win conversations. And there were a lot of those people that I find that the same thing's true when you get advice on fundraising. So, and it's almost especially true, I mean, I've dedicated, I've worked my whole career in Africa, and it's almost especially true where you get a lot of people parroting what they think is how ecosystems work. And sometimes you have to learn that, because the person on the other side wants to operate in the way they think Blackstone operates. I've had the privilege to work with Blackstone, with Carlyle, with TPG, and I find they're actually very creative, and they don't follow these rule books that everybody in Africa told me they always follow. And so, it's negative and a positive. I mean, the negative is you're going to read about these ecosystems, you're going to do your homework, you're going to go out, and you're going to find it very much lacking. But I would say for entrepreneurs, there's so many folks out there, and there's so many different avenues to raise money. Even thinking about what you would call private equity, I find private equity, which is just, not publicly traded equity investments, is a really broad group of people. It defines a really broad group of people and interests. And so, it's daunting because it's a bit of a needle in a haystack, but the reality is, I would argue that someone's out there that's on the other side and potentially energized about what you're doing. And it's your job to find them. And they might want to invest via debt, right? And get some kind of payment over time on their investment. They might want to be more of your partner in an equity standpoint. They might be a grant player. They might, by the way, they might be a customer. I actually see sometimes a lot of similarities in what I'm selling to customers and when I'm raising money for some of these businesses. But I feel like I kind of reject the formulaic approach, which is what we hear a lot about. And I really believe, you have to really kind of fight through that and look for those partners and that capital. And I would just say, for one example would be, one of the investments that we get asked about a lot is Maven Records. So we are helping to build, the largest, fastest growing record label in Africa, Maven Records, with our CEO and partner, Don Jazzy. And that process could have never been done in what people think of as a traditional investment approach in the African context, in terms of private equity, because there was no kind of deal there to be done. Don Jazzy was not looking to raise money. Don Jazzy didn't have kind of normal financials and all those kinds of things that you would do diligence on. So we spent 2 to 3 years getting to know Don Jazzy, working with Don Jazzy, spending our own money, investing in upgrading processes and doing all these things so that later we could make what is now an institutional investment. And now people look at it and they say, oh, I would like to be in music, or I would like to support the creative industry, which is, how we see the impact here is a huge number of creatives in Nigeria don't have an avenue and a platform to go global. But we had to take some very different creative approaches and look for different ways along the way to raise the capital we needed to get to each stage. It was not a formulaic, it was not really.
Yeah.
And I just think that's what people have to be ready for as an entrepreneur, is to really look at different sources of capital, different partners, and create that alignment, and don't expect it to be some kind of specific formula.
Well, but Dimple, I think, was making a point even beyond what I referenced in terms of the blog post, which is that it's not just like following rules on how you put together your PowerPoint. It's really much, much more than that. You mentioned, and Gabriel also mentioned, the importance of building relationships over the long term. And so, entrepreneurs can focus on that. There's no doubt about it. And doing your research, knowing who you're talking to. But, Dimple, just real quickly, because we're going to do kind of staccato here. We're going to get to audience questions in about, maybe about 8 minutes. Nobody wants to take any risk. Nobody wants to take risk on young entrepreneurs. We have tremendous teams that come out of the Halt Prize, and they struggle just to get the attention of somebody who might give them the resources. We can talk about debt, but banks just aren't going to invest. They're not going to lend. They're not going to lend to teams that don't already have sales record, and don't already have, in some cases, capital accounts that that they can sort of, in some sense, it's not even really a loan. It's just a securitized, like borrowing for a house. So how do entrepreneurs get around that? What's the way to kind of get that first step? Where is the capital that's willing to take a risk on early stage companies?
Yeah, well, if you're targeting impact entrepreneurs, I think you're already one step ahead as a social entrepreneurs, because impact entrepreneurs are willing to take, in my mind, a little bit more risk than a traditional bank would, right? Because you're not a nameless, faceless Me Too company. Hopefully you're working on something that's really disruptive, focusing on a certain market segment or product or service where there's empathy involved, right? And I think, listen, we're living in the time of COVID, racial strife, California is burning. Everybody wants to start investing and doing things that will make them feel good. And so you couldn't have picked a better time to be a social entrepreneur. So I think the ground level is set. How do you differentiate yourself? One is, if you are a social entrepreneur, emphasize the social parts of your business as well, right? Every early stage entrepreneur, we all know that forecasting is, everyone wants to see the hockey stick, right? But everybody knows it's a guessing game, especially if you're pre-revenue. So beef up the parts of the presentation you do know about, the social impact. And if you're creating, for example, an ed tech company, one that I helped start, don't just focus about, access to education. That could be one of the levers, but also what are the learning outcomes? I think as a social entrepreneur, the smarter, and I say that with the capital SMART, make all of your impact metrics smart so that entrepreneurs and investors can see that you're really taking outputs and outcomes into account on your impact metrics. I think that has to be as strong as any of the financial metrics. And, there are impact first entrepreneurs who would weight that portion of your business more strongly than the financial portion. People don't want a reason to say no. They really want a reason to say yes. And for those of you who are diverse, like I was, a female entrepreneur, a person of color from a developing world, an underrepresented group, you're also living in the age of diversity and inclusion after the hashtag Time's Up, hashtag Black Lives Matter movements. So please, diversity and inclusion, there are impact investors who have told me, if you know diverse founders, please send them my way. So I think the market has finally risen up to where many of you have been all along. Impact, social impact, sustainability, these are themes that no one can ignore now, regardless of where you are in the political spectrum. So play up the impact angle and be smart with it. And then if you are a diverse entrepreneur, whether it's in your teams, in the markets you're addressing, please weave D&I into your presentation as well. And those won't distract from your financials, but it will contextualize your financials in a way that just black and white spreadsheets won't.
Fantastic. So I love what you're saying about a broad set of metrics. In this year's Hult Prize, Bold Business for a Better Challenge, we've built in environmental unit economics as an element of what the teams really have to develop and communicate. But I think one of the things you're saying is, first of all, make sure that you have those measurements, but at the same time, make sure that you tell your story and give investors a reason to say yes. So I love that. Gabriel, I'm wondering if you could just get us back to some fundamentals, because we've talked about debt. We've talked, you alluded to grants, and then, we've talked about private equity, but just generally speaking, debt, equity, grants, what's the difference? Is one winning, the other's losing? What should entrepreneurs really be thinking about when they, think about raising capital, in terms of these different sources?
So my answer to that is they should be open to all of them in a strategic fashion. But I think if you limit yourself to debt, equity, and grant, you're doing yourself a disservice, especially if you come to family offices. This was spoken to earlier, and I think it's a really powerful point that I don't think a lot of folks understand and realize, is there are actually things that can be more valuable than money as you're starting up a company. And when you approach investors for equity or you're looking for debt or grants, you've got to be strategic. Your time is valuable. In the early stage, your lifespan is uncertain. And you've got to go after those organizations and groups that you have something in common with, that are going to be interested in the solution and business that you're proposing. And so it pays to be strategic and do your homework. And as you approach these groups, this is just an experience that I have often. Is folks come to me for money, or our group for money, but they need much more than money. I can help them with connections. I can help them with on the ground support and network. We have major expertise in certain areas, and sometimes it feels like when you lead with money and you approach somebody as just a simple investor, it's a little disrespectful. In our case, you're looking, and this word was brought up before, a partnership. That's really what you want, because money is just a contractual agreement. But if you can enter into a partnership with an individual or organization, they're going to give you much more than just money, and it's going to be much more valuable advice, network, guidance, strategic resource. They're going to bring in their partners. They're going to introduce you to the right people. And so that's where these relationships become super paramount and very, very important. And so if you're just chasing money and you're not open to advice or, support and resources in other ways, you're doing yourself a big service. So I would say on that, and maybe Phil, this isn't the exact answer you were looking for, but absolutely looking for debt and equity and grants, you should be open to all of those things. Obviously, all of you are, many of you who are listening are applying and looking at the Holt Prize, like looking for these diverse outlets. But the thing is one person's going to win the Holt Prize. Everybody that's involved in this process is going to end up with net worth. And so those things can be absolutely much more valuable in the long run. So that's what I would say on that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I know I've seen from having seen the experiences of the teams that have come through the Holt Prize. I think one of the toughest things is patience. And when you're young, patience is hard, generally speaking. But when you are just out of school or finishing school, you're weighing a job offer against continuing with a venture, and there's urgency to build something. And so I think for a lot of teams, when they talk about raising capital, it's really just about personal survival, and they don't feel that they don't feel like they have the time or the luxury to be building relationships with investors. The investors should be helping them. But the reality is that there's no way around what you and Bobby were saying, at least in my experience, there's no way around it. There's no shortcut. Those relationships are the foundation, and starting early to build them and being patient in listening to that input, responding to input, and really engaging in a partnership seems to me, from what I've observed, the only real pathway to success. Doesn't mean that you might might not blow somebody away with your pitch and walk away with $50K or $100K USD in early stage investment, but that is not the norm. So Jamal, I want to get back to you now, and thank you so much for that, Gabrielle. When you think about, because I really feel like sometimes we are selling our entrepreneurial teams a false dream in equity investment, as if it's only a good thing if somebody buys into their company. Hmm. So can you kind of give us a little bit of a sense of, somebody says that they are looking at $200,000 and they're only going to have to give away 30% of their company for $200,000, and it's going to help them get off the ground. As you listen to those types, forget about the numbers so much, but just like those types of discussions, what kind of guidance do you give for young entrepreneurs who have that first bite at getting some equity into their company?
I mean, there's, and I take advice. I know we don't have the time for you to tell you my grandfather's story about how he came out of the village to go to Marrakesh and start his own business, and how much I learned of the simplicity of those transactions he took to go through the jargon that we've, what I call the startup model, and BJ referred to this, Dimple and Gabriel also did in some shape or form. But the way I do it is how a therapist would tell you need to look inside. Looking inside means understanding exactly what you want before you go out and look for who's going to walk that journey with you. And for every entrepreneur, and this is the way as an investor, I sort of bucket most of these things. There's three main things if you're going to have into any economic endeavor. Number one, of course, is the passion, the product and the service that you're bringing to the market, and the passion that's going to drive it. You need to understand what that is and come to terms with this and be open-minded enough to see, okay, the market might not be in line with what I'm offering, but a small little pivot of it might fix it. Understand that pretty well. Yeah, right. Come into communication. Don't
fall in love with your idea. Do not fall in love with your idea.
Do not fall in love with your idea. But have passion. Yeah. Be able to actually communicate. If you're not sure about it, then how do you expect the investor to be as well? Yeah. And the second one, of course, is management and operations. Understanding, of course, what level, where your skills are. Are you going to be able to manage your company through where you need your skills? And that should be a different communication. I think BJ or Ripple says sometimes your customer could be useful. You'll learn from your customer or from somebody else in the market. Once you understand and come to terms with that, that's the second part of your understanding of what you plan to do. And third is ownership and how inclusive you want it to be. And ownership could be in the form of whether you want equity, you need a partner. Are you ready to give up enough and understand what's ready for you, but be realistic? At the same time, the patent part as well is an important component. Debt is an opportunity. If you understand these three, you will have the confidence to be able to communicate it. And some investors have qualities. I might not be a good investor for you, and BJ might be.
Right.
People might be a perfect investor. So doing the research to understand what's outside, and this is, I mean, it could be Blackstone or it could be your uncle. I mean, at the end of the day, knowing who you're going to go for, who you accept to bring into your kingdom, which what you determine it, is a big part of all of capital raising as well.
And then, that gets back to Gabriel's point about partnerships. Is partnerships are also about complementarities, and the better you know yourself and what your needs are, the better you're going to be able to understand from an investor what they can bring you. So I love those three. So just recap them, staccato. The three things.
Absolutely. Product and service driven by passion and understanding, management and operations, and how much where you're skilled at understanding your skill sets. And third is ownership and how inclusive you want that to be.
Fantastic. And I also see, some of the teams that come in, they're so strong at the start of the accelerator. They've got that product and service. They're passionate. But then we realize 2, 3, 4 weeks in, they've got all the expertise, that we bring to the castle, weekly pitch sessions. And they're not learning, they're not listening, they're not adapting. They're so with their product, and then by the end, they're nowhere. And the teams that adapted and that understood what the customer need and stayed really true to that, they're the ones that end up really making an impact. So yeah, well that's great. We're going to. First of all, one thing I want to do is we got 17 minutes left. For those of you listening in, I just want to say, first of all, this is the first digital speaker series. Major kudos to Nabila Tareen and our communications team, who's really the producer of the digital speaker series, putting this together. And this is something we're doing for our Hulk Prize community and for our global community, to bring together experts like this, talk about topics that really matter to early stage entrepreneurs and youth entrepreneurs in particular. And so, we've started with this topic about how to raise capital. But we're open to your ideas as to other topics we could address in future sessions. So put those into the comments before the session's over, sessions that you'd like to see in the future. But obviously for today, put your questions in the comments, and Nabila is sorting through those, and we'll spend probably about the last 10 minutes going through those comments. So back to the panel. I want to just kind of open it up to you guys. We've heard a bunch of great stuff from my standpoint. I mean, Dimple started out, she was talking about her own background, but I think it gets to a little bit what you were saying just now, Jamal. About bringing your whole self to your work, and that in some sense that this, and BJ, you sort of referenced the same thing, that like working with early stage companies, you bring so many capacities. And so when you're I think whenever you're trying to engage somebody in a partnership, the more you can bring your whole self to that, the more you understand who you are and you bring your whole self, the more you're going to connect with other people, and the more powerful it's going to be. We talked about the possibility of creating value, and I think this notion of looking not just how to take value out of an investor, but how do you create value for them? When you're talking to an investor, you can be a resource for them. And I think one thing we haven't talked about so far, but I believe is implicit. And you, Jamal, you were referring to this a little bit in terms of the people who are best placed to solve a problem in any given place are the people who live that. And so our entrepreneurs, they live in environments that multinational corporations are trying to reach. So, this is expertise that they can bring. And then finally, just some random thoughts that I just, it's the notion of Sherpas, which kind of relates also, to what we were just talking about, that the folks on this call, you may not think you have a lot in the way of assets, but knowing your environment is a huge asset in and of itself. So I just want to see, based on what you guys have heard, thinking about the capital continuum, different phases of growth, different colors of money, different types of capital we've talked about, but also, the non, money types of capital, capital connections, what guidance you would give to entrepreneurs, like your, number one thing that you want to make sure that they do not leave this call without keeping in mind when it comes to having to raise capital. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds, 5, not even, to ponder it. And BJ, it's going to start with you. Number one thing.
Yeah, I mean, my number one thing to kind of, my fellow entrepreneur, and that the biggest mistake, it's hard. And if you don't think it's hard, don't do it. But it's really hard. And I just find that, if you think you're doing something innovative, why would you expect everyone to understand what you do right out of the gate? What you're doing is different. It's innovative. Right. You have to expect that most people aren't going to understand you. You have to expect that most people are going to tell you you're crazy. And
BJ, I just got to jump in there. We both live that one, right? You see it, you believe it, it's true. How come they don't understand me, right?
And by the way, Phil, I'm mostly telling myself that on a Tuesday is hey, stop expecting people to understand what you're saying if you think you're doing innovative things. And consistent with that, most people are not going to help you. This expectation that everybody around is waiting to help you, most people aren't. Now, the way I've dealt with that is for the people that help me in my life, I try to make sure I pay them back tenfold, whether they're an investor, whether they're a mentor, whether they're a staff person that's worked extra hard. I mean, my point is, my expectation is most people aren't going to help me. Yes. And so the people that do, I want to pay them back times 10, right? I want to pay them back. And I find that, the first stage for an investor is to make someone else money, right? Make someone else better. And then I'll tell you what, it'll become a lot easier for the next fundraise. It's not, but and the last thing I would say on this.
Well, that's word of mouth too, BJ, because investors will talk to everybody. Any interaction you have is your reputation. Interaction, right?
And I would just say it doesn't get easier. I mean, people say to me oh, it must be so much easier for you to raise capital. It must be. And the thing is, I mean, just this year, I had a 3-hour session with the founder of one of the largest private equity firms in the world. And he was brutal in terms of asking questions. For 3 hours, it was completely brutal. And I walked out and all of his staff said to me, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And I said, you know what? I'm a nobody from nowhere. I've worked for 20 years to get in that room. I didn't expect it to be easy. You know what I mean? You have to expect that each time you get to the next level, it's still going to be hard. And I think getting yourself ready for that and ready for that journey is really important, especially early in your entrepreneurial career, is realize it's hard and realize that those few people that support you, you have to cherish them and pay them forward times 10.
Yeah, that's so great. And I'd even go further, BJ. I mean, almost nobody is going to help you. It is so rare. And, and I puffed you guys up at the beginning, and it's all true. And you can look up the bios and it's real. These folks on this call have done amazing things. But those of you who I know better than others, I know the war stories. And I know how painful it's been. And, BJ, you and I were on a call just recently for almost a couple hours, talking about stuff. And I mean, it is so hard. So, I would say that, guys, in terms of raising capital, any interaction you have that's positive, any invitation that you have, to connect to somebody, any support you get, even if it's, don't look for that check, look for that sign of some kind of connection and be grateful for it. Because these are rare moments, and little by little, small steps, they will get you there. So, Dimple, your number one thing?
I think I would say, be really authentic. I think in the traditional world of consumer product companies and social media companies, there's been a lot of Me Too models. And the whole thing about being a social entrepreneur is you're being disruptive. You're addressing a problem or need that's going to help the whole world, but probably the way you're doing it is also very disruptive. So be authentic to your story and to your background, and so that you're not a Me Too, because I think people will see that as differentiated. And I saw a lot of questions coming in around team. Being an entrepreneur is also very lonely, right? It's hard, but it's also very lonely. So I talked about diversity and inclusion. If you don't have all the skill sets, make sure your team is fortified with diverse backgrounds. And diverse is really broad here, right? It's skill sets, it's ethnicity, it's locality, it's technical expertise. And if you don't have enough money to to build a team, a strong board of advisors. The best way to raise money is to ask for advice. Don't be so obvious when you raise money. People love being asked for advice. And that's a really stealth way to say, people want to root for you. People want to root for you. So ask for advice, be authentic, surround yourself with a diverse team or a diverse set of board of advisors, so you're not drinking your own Kool-Aid.
But Dimple, if I could just make a comment there, that also has to do with knowing who you're speaking with. Because if you know somebody who's an investor and they've had 20 years in the food industry and they have, expertise in exactly the thing that your, venture is focused on, let's say seaweed, we have some seaweed companies and they happen to have, been involved in that area. That's an opportunity. Just ask them for input, right? Forget about the money and they may connect you to somebody. So I think it's a fantastic idea to look in the investor world for people who have expertise in the thing you're doing, and then just ask them for advice. Do 20 of those calls, and then never bring a money ask to that first call. Never spoil the first call with a money ask. Just let things be positive, right? Would you agree with that, Dimple? Because I think that's a great thing to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Informational interviews, open-ended questions, show that you're listening, listen to their advice, and then maintain the relationship, right?
And genuinely care about what they have to tell you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, Jamal, your number one thing?
Yeah, I mean, in light of this, is all music to my ears. I mean, one thing is just be you, in essence, and talk your story. And each story, you don't know who can connect with. I remember when I was first raising money for one of the startups that I was trying to raise, especially in the healthcare industry, I talked about my late mother's struggle with breast cancer. And with one of the people that ticked. And to be honest with you, even though he said you weren't very convincing, but it's that story that made me feel like I understand you, and I want to do more. And so, I mean, these simple realize we're all human beings. Investors are not machines that just log in algorithm. There are people like you. They might like you, they might not like you. And it's okay if they don't like you. One of the things I also refer to, especially from our friends who are from developing countries, where I know sometimes it's easy for us to say, hey, man, you can just talk or reach out. For them, it's an uphill battle if you're coming. I mean, your whole system was built on banks with big metal doors and people that are holding your money. But in today's world, get on LinkedIn, jump on with people, and of course, once you understand what you want, communicate it, and be very easy to ask. And so, I mean, this was probably just be you, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Of course, I think Dimple referred to it, have a pool of advisors. And in our terms, a pool of advisors, people are not people in suits. They could be your cousin, your uncle, your teacher, many of these people who would just advise you on and back you, people who care about you, just want success for you. And so, yeah, reach out, get the discussion going with everybody, but know where you want this discussion to go.
Well, and what you just said made me think about another thing, which is how to communicate. Gabrielle used the word respectfully. How to communicate respectfully, but also with determination. And I say all teams, no long intro emails. A paragraph, 2 paragraphs, simple, maybe with an attachment, super simple, just like hi, I want to get to know you. Again, invitation to get input, not that we're looking for money, we're looking for guidance, we're looking for other things first. Send that, wait a week, send a follow-up. If you got a phone number, you can send a text message, call, be persistent. And then, but I get teams who tell me, no, I sent an email, they never answer. How many emails do you think we all get? So, don't send an email and send a follow-up the next day. Wait a week, follow up, be persistent, but look for those open-ended opportunities. So guys, look, everybody on this call, you have massive opportunities to build relationships with investors that are interested in your stage of investment, that are interested in your sector, and that you have gotten to know, but it's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have to build those relationships. It may take a year, it may take 2 years, may take longer. But if you invest now, it's planting a seed, tend that seed, and 3-4 years out, maybe it's even going to be for a different company than the one you're working on now. You're going to realize how valuable those relationships are. Yeah. One more thing from you, Jamal.
Yeah, Phil, and just follow on Dimple and Beaches. This is the world of, with this pandemic, we might not see the ills because we're stuck in our homes, but the screens are presenting, be inclusive. Gender equality right now is not something that passed. Be inclusive. Racial equality, forcibly displaced people that we're trying to raise for the environment. These are serious issues And the old schooler, the people talk, it's all about the money. As Gabriel said, some people are not in it for only the money.
Yeah.
There's real change. So make yourself a believer, you know?
Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic. So Gabriel, I'm going to go to you, and then we'll just do like a quick close. Gabriel, your number one thing that you want folks on this call to remember, before they leave.
It's something I think everybody knows is entrepreneurship is a journey, and continue to learn and gather information all along that journey. I know that I am really, my process of evaluating investments is really a process of learning new things that I didn't know, gaps that I didn't see. And as entrepreneurs are approaching investors, approaching advisors, and Dimple, you really underscored the point that I wanted to make is seek advice. They have things that are so much more valuable than money. Continue to learn and be responsive and evolve. The journey of entrepreneurship is about evolution and pivot. And I think that is one of the most valuable things is when you get new information, be responsive to it. And Jamal, you were making this point. We live in an incredibly, we have new challenges in our world. These crises that we're dealing with are surfacing things that we didn't see before. There is a whole new opportunity to solve these problems, and they're bringing them to light, and they're surfacing our weaknesses. So there's an incredible opportunity for entrepreneurs in this world to really solve the problems of our day and age and add value and add impact.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, Steve Blank, global entrepreneur guru, we're one of the people really involved in the lean startup movement. I've heard him speak multiple times, and his number one point is, don't tell me what you're doing, tell me what you're learning. Exactly to your point, and so and when investors see that learning trajectory, I think that can make a huge difference. So thank you so much for that, Gabriel. I think those are great comments. So we've got 2 minutes left, and now I'm going to put it, because we got a lot of social media action here. I'm going to put it to you guys now to a single sentence. Okay, single sentence. This is your tweet. This is your thing that you want to have on your IG post, what you guys, and now it's going to be you, Jamal, single sentence.
You put me on the spot here. I think one motto, raising capital is a relationship industry.
Boom.
Treat it as such.
Boom. Raising capital as a relationship, treat it as such. Okay, Dimple in the castle.
Yeah. Social entrepreneurs, this is your time. Rise up to meet the market. Rise up to the moment. You have leverage. You don't even recognize it.
Fantastic.
Rise up.
All right. Gabrielle?
Look for partners, not investors.
Awesome. All right, BJ?
Yeah, well, I think this is what's on top of my Twitter, which is, everything in life is hard. So go do some really impossible things, go make a huge impact, because no matter what you go do, it's all hard. So you might as well do something that has a huge impact.
Man, that's great. We're right at the hour. I had a mentor whose area of study was the origin of life. And, he told me early on, it's as much work to solve a big problem as it is to solve a small problem. So go for the big problems. So go for it. Be tenacious, guys. People do want to give you love. They want to say yes. They want to help you, but they're going to be few, and you will find them. You've gotten some real, gold nuggets of wisdom from this group. And it's definitely not only about capital, it's about all the other things we've talked about. So thanks so much. We're going to close out exactly at 10. And it's been amazing doing this. Thank you, Nabila and the communications team, for getting this going. And, thank you, Bertel Halt and Ahmed and everybody who's built the Halt Prize, because this is the #1 global social movement for change, bar none. And it's fantastic to have you guys, involved at our opening digital speaker series. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Amazing.